Good afternoon and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today it's time to plant our moringa. Now this variety is dwarf moringa. And here in North Central Maryland, we have to grow it as an annual because it won't survive the winter. And these plants are 12 weeks old and they've already hardened off for 3 weeks. In 1 year, they can grow more than 6 feet tall. They grow really fast. So I want to space them 2 to 4 feet apart. I've decided to plant mine 2 feet apart. I'm only going to grow 3. If you want to grow in rows, space your rows 4 feet apart. Moringa is a tropical tree. It prefers full sun. Here I grow in a very small space in the center of downtown. And I don't want to block the morning sun that comes from this direction and shade out other plants. So I've decided to plant it along this fence, and it is going to get less sun because my neighbor's trees are going to shade it. But it'll produce good enough for me. Now, if you want to grow moringa year-round, you can grow it in a pot, but you have to make sure it's at least 30 inches deep. This moringa has some deep roots, so it really doesn't like its roots disturbed. And it prefers being direct sown, but here in North Central Maryland, we just don't have time for that. Technically, it likes nighttime temperatures above 65, but we're still in the 50s at night. That's why you see some yellow leaves. It is very cold sensitive. Now, I started these in soil blocks, the big soil blocks, but I felt that the roots were just too cold. So I potted them up, and they really haven't had time to fill those pots. So the first one that I unpotted, I left that stake in there, and the weight of the stake broke the soil. So I'm going to pull the stake out of these other ones before I plant them. Now, if you notice, the soil is very loose. Now, speaking of soil, moringa, it can handle poor soil. I don't plan to feed my moringa. Now here in the city, squirrels and skunks will dig in that soil. And because I've seen that the root ball is still small, I'm going to surround each plant with some squares of hardware cloth that I cut out myself. And I'm going to secure them with a landscape pin. because they're still small, if I'm working in this area, I don't want to accidentally step on them and break them. So I'm going to surround each plant with one of these cages. Now, moringa is naturally pest resistant, but because it's still cold at night, I'm going to add some Sluggo. It's organic and it's not going to hurt the birds or the animals. And because it grows fast, it's going to need support, and that fence is going to help. But I'm also going to add a garden stake. Now, once the roots get established, moringa is drought tolerant. So don't overwater it. It is prone to root rot, especially if you're going to grow it in a container. Don't water too much. Now, what I'm going to do with the 4 of these that are left, I'm going to share them with my community. Moringa has 46 antioxidants and 18 amino acids. It is a complete protein. The whole plant is edible except for the roots. Don't eat the roots. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today I'm going to give you a broccoli rabe update. This broccoli rabe was planted mid-April and we started harvesting at the very end of the month. I use it in my husband Dale's salads. If I harvest it, get it washed right away and put in the fridge, it lasts about a week. And what parts do I use in his salad? The flower buds and the flowers too. And the small tender leaves, let's see, like this one. Now when I harvest the broccoli rabe, I don't just cut off the tips. I cut way down on the plant because it grows back really quickly. See how that's flexible? You can eat that whole stem. But this one, it's stiff. It's too woody. And these small tender leaves, they taste like spinach. But the bigger leaves, they're just too bitter. And I try to find every last small flower bud because they're going to open really quickly. I also don't want to leave the flowers because they'll go to seed and then the plant will stop making new buds. Now, this has gotten plenty of rain, and I haven't watered. The mulch has helped too. Nighttime temperatures have been in the 50s and 60s, so it hasn't turned bitter yet. Now I'm not going to harvest this very last one. I'm going to leave this one to keep flowering and go to seed for next year's broccoli rabe. Now I still need to protect it from 3 things: slugs, kind of flying pests, and make sure I put the netting back on to protect from cabbage worms. Here it tends to be white cabbage butterfly caterpillars. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today is June 4th and the whole garden is finally planted out. So today let's take a tour and see what's growing. This is a purple table grape. There's a man who walks by my front garden every day, and he gave it to me. He said he felt like this would give it a good home. The birds love these grapes, especially the catbirds and the cardinals. So I've set up some shelves, a table, and some chairs to give them a place to perch and enjoy their feast. They should be ready at the end of July. Now these are mini roses that I just rescued from the nearby historic old cemetery. After Mother's Day, it's a good time to dig through those trash cans and find old discarded plants. So I brought them home 2 weeks ago. They hardly had any leaves on them, but I planted them and look, they look so good. They're growing well. Now, I started growing in this garden 17 years ago, but got really serious about no-till 12 years ago when I was hit with rheumatoid arthritis. I had to find an easier way to garden. So in the fall, I take any old mulch or old plants and I scatter them around the garden and cover everything with cardboard. Then I top that with a new layer of mulch. So for 12 years, I've been building soil. Because everything under that cardboard breaks down. Means that this garden is about 1 foot taller than my neighbor's yards. Now back then I didn't have a lot of money, and that's one reason I used cardboard and for many years mulched with fall leaves, because both of them were free. But the soil would erode, so I started using bricks to make a little wall to hold in the extra soil. Because I already had the bricks. They came with the house. And we had a place that we could get some more for free. So basically, I started with free things in my garden to build rich soil. Now, one thing that's new this year are these super hoops. I wanted to protect the onions the whole growing season. Now I have some low hoops, but the onion tops would always outgrow that size. And I need to protect them here in the heart of the city from digging animals, squirrels, skunks, and robins mainly. Those are my big three. And so far I'm really liking this. Now, it does require the netting to be 10 feet wide. And let's open this up and see what's growing inside. Now, the first thing we planted mid-March were our onions. And we have 3 varieties. A red Italian flat, which will be ready mid-June. Pretty soon. Walla Walla, and a sweet yellow Spanish Utah onion. And those 2 will be ready in July. Now they've just started the bulbing up stage. But see how beautiful and big these green tops are? Those are my solar panels sucking in the sun's energy to grow big bulbs. Now, mid-April, we planted this broccoli rabe and got our first harvest at the very end of that month. And I'm growing this for Dale's salads. Now, which parts do I put in the salad? So I include the flower buds and the flowers. I have to put the netting back on to keep protecting the onions from the digging animals and the broccoli rabe from cabbage worms. Now we have 1 blueberry bush, and you do require more than 1 for pollination, but my neighbor has 2. And this cage is to protect from the birds eating our berries. I love my birds, but I don't want to share the blueberries, and they will eat them green, so we never have a chance to harvest. But this will allow pollinators in to pollinate the berries. Now, blueberries do require watering. Most of the garden I don't have to water because I use a deep mulch. But blueberries have very shallow roots. I think this is its 4th year, and the first 2 years it grew really slowly because I didn't know to water it enough. Now every day I give it 2 to 3 gallons of water if it doesn't rain. And over here is our flower ring. In the spring, the first thing that grows are the beautiful yellow daffodils all around it. And in the middle, we have snowflakes and paper whites along the front. And interspersed are the irises in April, and then the purple alliums. But all of those are done. Next are going to be the gladiolas and lilies, about July. Now this area will be full of our California giant zinnias, planted mid-May, and in the middle of them, fennel. Butterflies, goldfinch, bees, and hummingbirds love zinnias. The swallowtail butterflies will lay their eggs in the fennel, and the caterpillars will eat the leaves. It's one of their host plants. And along this fence, we have our sunflowers. The variety is a multi-branching autumn beauty mix. Bees, goldfinch, cardinals love the sunflowers, and the squirrels too. They're gonna bloom really soon. And this whole area here is for our yellow summer squash. A straight neck and a crook neck variety. It's just gonna fill this whole space, and that's why I only planted 3 mid-May. And we're gonna start harvesting in just a couple of weeks. Now these onions were planted at the same time as the other onions, mid-March. But I do expect these bulbs to be bigger because they get more morning sun and afternoon sun. Overall, they get more sun right here. In front of the onions are our June-bearing strawberries, which actually started producing late April, and they've just finished. There's occasionally 1 or 2 that'll pop up. So now, every day, I look for and cut runners because I want the plants to grow bigger. I need to thin them out if they're getting crowded, and I need to fertilize them. And I'm going to use this organic berry tone. This area only has this one sunflower because I've reserved this space for okra. Now here in north central Maryland, if I want fresh okra, I have to grow it myself. But the challenge is, okra doesn't like nighttime temperatures below 65, and we're still having nighttime temperatures below 65. So I started these inside in mid-February because I wanted big, strong plants. And so far, it's been very successful. There's plenty of blossoms, and every day I'm getting 1 or 2 fruit. These were planted in mid-May. Now here's our simple compost ring. In the fall, I'll take the plant matter in here and chop and drop it around the garden and then lay cardboard on top. If there's any left over, I'll flip it onto the area that now has the zinnias. And then at the bottom, I'll harvest the compost that's ready. I've been doing this for years. Now along here is my favorite vegetable to grow, my sweet red peppers. These are Ivarski. They were planted just, I think, 1.5 weeks ago, and they've been suffering from the cold. You'll see some purple leaves that are actually falling off now, but it is growing new leaves because it's warming up. But it's interesting, there's one plant near the compost that has not suffered any cold damage, and it's because of the heat radiating off of this compost ring. Now, I do feed these cow mag because here we suffer from blossom end rot. All my neighbors do too. Next to the peppers are the Black Beauty eggplant. Those were planted 2 weeks ago, and they've just kind of been in limbo, waiting for the warm weather. And now they're starting to leaf out too. They're both going to be ready to harvest in July. Now, green peppers will be ready before that, but I prefer to wait until they turn red. When the onions are done in July, we'll take off these super hoops because the peppers and the eggplant, they don't need the netting, and it'll give them more space to spread out. Now here in the alley is the grandkids' garden. And they just have a little bit of everything. And this is where we have a community shelf. It's where I give away free plants. Like right now, I have some strawberries I potted up, and I'm waiting for them to develop roots. Then I'll set them out on the shelf, and people will come get them for free. The grandkids were here last week and planted these. And these strawberries, I just moved from an area that I thinned, so they haven't yet developed their roots. The big leaves, they're going to die off, and new leaves will grow from the center. Over here, from our fall leaves. We bagged them up and they're going to break down into soil. But it's going to take 2 years. So I think they'll be finished. They've already gone through the winter and they'll be ready spring of 2026. Now I do have to water this garden every day if it doesn't rain. This bed is full of 4 years of composted quail bedding. Most of it's broken down. The newest that's in there is more than 1 year old. And in each planting hole, I do put in potting soil. I set this up in 2021. And every year I just added more and more compost to it. That's a young dove that's only been here a few days. There's several new doves. It hasn't yet figured out what to do when I'm walking through. Tomorrow come back for part 2 of our garden tour. It's getting late and it's time for me to cook Dale's dinner. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today is June the 5th, and we're going to continue our garden tour. Yesterday, we looked at that side of the garden, and today we're going to start over here, near the rain barrels. We only have one sunflower over here. And this poor thing gets stuck behind the door when it's open, but it still survives, and it is going to be smaller, but it will branch out and make plenty of flowers. Over here, we have 3 moringa trees. Now, it's not an ideal location because there's a lot of shade, but I don't need full production from these trees. It is a very bushy, fast-growing tree. Right now, they're struggling because it's been so cold. But soon, they're just going to explode with growth. And they're going to get more than 6 feet tall. And I use the greens, I harvest the leaves, and I make a green powder. I started them indoors and planted them out mid-May. Now along here we have more June-bearing strawberries. And just last week, there was a strip right in front of me that I dug up, and I planted some in the grandkids' garden, but most of them I potted up. And I'm going to wait. I'm thinking it's going to be about a month for the roots to develop. Then I'll set them out on the community shelf, free for my neighbors. The strawberries were right along here, and like I said, last week I potted them up. Now the big leaves, they're going to die off, and I'll trim them when that happens. And the middle is going to produce new growth. Now here are our cosmic purple carrots. Right here was my first sowing. And if you remember, the strawberries were in that corner and they just bushed out and blocked the germination of the rest of the carrots. And in the middle, it's where we're saving the fall carrots for seed. I think there were like 4 of them, and they really leafed out, also shading out the carrot seed. So only this corner germinated. But 2 weeks ago, I sowed some more. And they've sprouted. Now these first ones sown should be ready at the end of June. And the other ones probably a month or a month and a half later. Now back here, we have fall onions and beets that I overwintered, and they're going to seed. I've saved onion seeds before, but it's the first time for me to save beet seeds, and I'm so excited. Now this is our 3rd super hoop tunnel to protect our veggies from digging squirrels and cabbage worms. Let's open it up and see what's inside. Now the second vegetable we planted in late March were our Detroit dark red beets. Many of them are ready, and they're going to be harvested, all of them, by mid-June. And back here behind me are our Ace red cabbage. And I'm growing these for Dale's salads. Now they're not going to be ready at the same time as the beets. So after we harvest the beets, we'll leave some of these hoops and shorten this tunnel because the cabbage is going to need protection from the cabbage worms. They've started to head up. Now both of these have started inside from seed, and after I transplanted them, I did water for about 7 days, but after that, I haven't had to water at all. The only thing I've had to do is weed out the morning glories. That is my biggest perennial weed. Now let's get this covered and protected because I've still seen the white cabbage butterflies around. Like I said, the beets are going to be harvested by mid-June, just in time for the blackberries to be ready. And these are thornless. Now here in this gap, I've planted 3 lemon cucumbers. They're a small round cucumber, and those will be ready in July, and 1 sunflower. And this right here is our fall red cabbage that we protected over winter, and it's now making seeds. They're going to be ready soon. We just have to wait for them to dry and harvest them, and then we'll take out this plant. And that will give more room for the stevia and the basil to bush out. Both were planted mid-May, just a couple of weeks ago. And over here is where I like to grow my lettuce. It gets less sun over here because these berries provide some shade. And I have the varieties of my own saved seed. So I have a red oak leaf that I've been growing for 12 or 13 years. Then I have a black-seeded Simpson lettuce and some kind of red leaf. It's possible it's a romaine. It came in a free lettuce mix. I also direct sowed some French breakfast radishes. They'll eat salad every day. And this is the last sunflower. Now it's going to be smaller because it doesn't get as much sun. But for watching the birds, you can sit up in the balcony and it's right here. So it's one of my favorite sunflowers in the garden. Then along here are our red raspberries. They're just starting to ripen now. And they're going to fruit twice, once now and later in August, September, and October until the first freeze. So they fruit twice. And down here is a second mini rose. It's just like the other one that I rescued from the old historic cemetery. It was just left in a pot and it had dried out and it was in the trash. Now this morning after our walk, I came back and the other one had been dug up. A squirrel had dug it up. So I took the time to put down some hardware cloth to protect both of them. Now this area between the houses, Dale has christened Bumblebee Breezeway. Because the bees fly back and forth through here. Now my goal with this area is beauty, not high production. Because this area gets very limited sun. Only about 2 hours of direct sun every day. And because these row houses are so tall, I want to be able to look down and see all of this beauty. And along the fence is a porcelain berry vine. The birds love this thing. It is invasive. And I do pull them out of the garden. But the cardinals, they will nest here. Haven't done it this year yet, but last year there were 3 babies along here. Now I have 4 green stalk vertical planters. And I did modify them a little bit. So I have 4 with only 4 tiers. They come 5-tier and 3-tier, and they have a 7-tier too. I bought 2 5-tier and 2 3-tier, and I made 4 4-tier. Now these are our French marigolds, and the small flowers are periwinkle. Now these are summer flowers I grew for the green stalk, but I only planted half of them because the spring flowers aren't finished yet, and I left those. And I planted out 2 green stalk with the summer flowers. And I thought, well, what do I do with these? So I planted them here in these pots. Now, if you notice, I don't have the top water reservoir on here because the side of the house is sloped. And the green stalk watering system, where you pour water in and then it trickles through, won't work properly here. The back side will stay dry, so I just hand water myself. It's just too sloped. Now I like to plant 3 pockets with perennial greens and 3 pockets with annual flowers. Now the summer flowers that I have are petunias, marigolds, and periwinkle over on the other side. I change out the annual flowers every year, but the greens are year-round. In winter, they die back, but they come back to life in the spring. So we have creeping Jenny, strawberries, and a variety of herbs. Herbs do really well on a green stalk. Now, these are the petunias and more periwinkle that I didn't plant yet. And later, when the spring flowers are finished, I'll plant those into the green stalks. The 2 green stalks with the spring flowers are still going because of less sun in this area and cool nights. Dale made this sign for me a few years ago. I just love it. The spring flowers that I took out of the summer green stalks, I saved and planted here, and they're doing well. Now let's go into the front garden. It's really small. Now these are what I call our porch pots. Any flowers I had left over, I planted in here. Now the pansies were planted in the fall, but the stalk and the snapdragons I planted for the spring, nesting birds in the area just picked them clean over and over again. The snapdragons are just tiny. The stalk did a little bit better. It's finally growing. I left in the spring flowers, but went ahead and planted the summer flowers, the leftover petunias. Now I do deadhead all of my flowers to keep them blooming, except for the periwinkle. It does it for itself. Its flowers fall off naturally. That's one reason the pansies are still going. Every morning I deadhead the old flowers. Now along here we have more sunflowers, but these are the mammoth variety, and they're only going to make one large head and probably get about 12 feet tall. They're really growing fast. And here are our determinate bush tomatoes. And I put the tunnel up because the birds were picking these clean too. Every time all the leaves got picked off and new leaves grew, they picked them off again. And they actually killed one of the tomatoes. And I had to replant it. So I think 2 are big enough now to leave uncovered. But the middle one, I'm going to leave the tunnel on because it's still pretty small. And along here are our spicy hot peppers, red cayenne and early jalapeno. They don't like the cold, but now they're really starting to grow new leaves and they're just going to bush out quickly. And luckily, the birds didn't touch them because they don't like the spicy peppers. And here are more of our French marigolds. Now, they're not as big as ones on the side because the birds were pecking the leaves off too. I finally covered them with a net. And they all survived except for one. We did lose one. That one right there. They're going to love all the sun in this front garden. This is the sunniest, warmest spot on our property. And over here are more plants I rescued from the cemetery. So there's petunias, and I thought the other ones were geraniums, but I'm not sure. But they are pretty, and they're all surviving. And the last thing in our garden are more strawberries all along the edge. But these are ever-bearing strawberries. They're just going to keep producing fruit, mostly in the spring and then again in the fall. This year they've given us huge berries. They've really done well. Now I finished the morning watering and I've pulled all the weeds, and now it's time to go up on the balcony and enjoy the garden and read. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today it's June the 7th and it's time for an onion update. Now these onions were the first veggie we planted back in mid-March. The cool, rainy spring has created beautiful, big, healthy green tops. Now that the sun's up at 5:30 and setting at 8:30, these long days are letting the leaves act as a solar energy collector to feed the bulbs. Normally, I don't water my onions, but because I'm creating this growing guide for you guys, I want to be able to give you the best information to get the biggest bulbs. So I bought a rain gauge. And I researched and I found a variety of answers, but I picked the advice that during the leafing stage, the onions need 1 inch of rain every 4 days. During the bulbing stage, like now, they need 2 inches of rain every 4 days. And when the bulbs are drying out, as the tops are falling over, they need 1.5 inches of rain every 4 days. Onions do require a lot of water, but kind of be careful not to drown them because they can rot. So I'm going to add some links in the description with that information and how to figure out the amount of rain that's fallen, and then how much does that equal in gallons that you water. Now yesterday we almost got 1 inch of rain. It's been a very wet spring. I think I've only had to water twice. Now, I love watching Cog Hill Farm, and he is always very successful in growing big onion bulbs. And his advice is to scoot the mulch in the soil from around the base of the plant. Don't let it cover the bulb and kind of blanch it out. So I've been doing that. Now remember, we planted 3 varieties. A red Italian flat called, I think, Cipollini. I think that's how you spell it. Those are right here. This direction. There's a few that got mixed in. Walla Walla, and sweet Spanish Utah yellow. Sweet yellow Spanish Utah. The red will be ready this month because they're only going to grow about 2 to 3 inch wide bulbs. Very small onion. And the other two, the Walla Walla, it can be 6 inches. And the sweet Spanish is the same. It can be 6 inches, 3.5 to 6 inches. The Walla Walla, 4 to 6 inches. Those aren't going to be ready until next month in July. So we're going to wait until the top's yellow and brown and full overall on their own. And the neck will become, it'll die off. Then we'll harvest them. Now, I'm loving these super hoops. They've been protecting from digging animals since we planted these in mid-March, the whole growing season. Their height is just perfect. The onion tops have plenty of room to spread out. Let's go ahead and get this covered back and let it keep doing its job. Then we're going to go over to our second tunnel and look at those onions. Now these onions get less sun, so I don't expect these bulbs to get as big as the other ones. But we'll see. Now I'm not going to open this all the way, but I'm going to open the corner and harvest just a few for our Sunday family birthday celebration. I'm cooking fajitas. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today is June 12th and it's time to harvest our Detroit dark red beets. Now these new super hoops, which are tall and wide, plus the netting, have kept animals from digging in our beets. Here that tends to be squirrels and skunks, and last week I saw a raccoon. But let's get this open and see how they're looking inside. Now I started these seeds indoors under lights in soil blocks and transplanted them out at the end of March. Beets are easy to grow. After planting them, I watered them every day for a week until the roots were established, and then after that, I just left them to grow. Now we're going to harvest them all. Now I do a no-till garden with deep mulch. That's also helped me not needing to water the beets. And it does prevent most of the weeds, but morning glories will push through that mulch, and I've had to weed those several times. Now the beets in the front are bigger, and the beets at the back tend to be smaller. And that's because the blackberries are shading out the morning sun. Now, you don't have to harvest all your beets at the same time. You can leave the small ones to keep bulbing up and get bigger. Let me show you an example. Now, beet seeds are actually a fruit, and they contain more than one seeds. Now, I did thin all of my beets just down to one seedling. But if you direct sow and more than one beet is clumped together, you can harvest the biggest one and leave the small ones to keep growing. But if, like me, you sowed them inside in soil blocks or pots and then transplanted, if more than one beet grows together and you harvest the big one, the other one will probably die because the roots get intertwined. So if you direct sow, you can harvest the big one and leave the small one. But if you start the seeds indoors, you're going to have to harvest them both at the same time. It wants its jelly, but it's not sure if I'm too close to the feeder. Now the bigger beets I'm going to save for my husband Dale's salads. They're going to last a long time in the refrigerator. I lightly wash them and make sure I don't scrub the skins, and then I dry them and put them in a baggie with paper towel and put it in the fridge. And every week or two, I'll change out the paper towel in the baggie, and they last for months. And the smaller beets, I'm going to scrub really well, peel them, shred or grate them, and dehydrate them to turn into beet powder. That way it lasts a long time. Now the leaves can be really powerful and bitter, but if you catch them young right after planting, they're good in salads or sautéed. But be careful, beet greens are high in oxalates, which can be a problem if you suffer from kidney stones. Now, I plan to dehydrate the greens. I'll powder them and then mix them with a variety of greens that I harvest all summer long. So if I can leave the small beets in the ground to keep growing, why do I harvest them all? It's because the blackberries behind them will be ready in just a few weeks, and I want to be able to get back there to pick them. I grow in a very small space here in the heart of the city, in an old historic house downtown. That's the biggest reason I start my seeds indoors. It gives me a head start so I can get them harvested early and clear that space for the blackberries. If you've noticed, the shape of the beets isn't round, it's more pear-shaped. That's because I started them in soil blocks. But since they're only for eating at home and not for selling, it's not an issue. These cabbages are not ready to harvest, and they're going to continue to need the protection of the netting. But the rest of this doesn't need it any longer. So I'm going to pull up some of these hoops and shorten the tunnel. I'm also going to sheet mulch that area with cardboard and top that with a new layer of mulch. Otherwise, the weeds in this area would just take over. Now let's go ahead and shorten these hoops before the white cabbage butterflies come back. And this is last fall's beet going to seed. I protected it all winter, and now I'm going to have my own beet seeds. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today is June the 15th and it's time for a red cabbage update. Now this variety is Red Acres cabbage and it was transplanted late March. So let's go ahead and open the netting and take a look. These are big, beautiful cabbages. They really look good, and they're starting to head up. Now, they've been protected with this netting from the very beginning, protected from cabbage worms. But for the first few days, I forgot about slugs, and they had slug damage. But I added some Sluggo, and that took care of the issue. So today, we're going to go ahead and add some more because we're still having some cool, wet nights. Now, if you've been feeding your cabbages, now is the time to stop. When they're heading up, you don't want to keep feeding them. You want them to focus on that center core instead of producing more of the big, beautiful side leaves. Now, I don't feed my cabbages because I already have a really rich organic matter in my soil. And because I do a no-till deep mulch method, I've only had to water the first week until the roots got established. And we've also had a cool, wet spring. The only time I've opened the netting is a few times to pull weeds. My persistent weed is morning glories because it'll poke through that mulch. I've also opened the netting for updates. Now that it's open, let me get behind this tunnel to pull some morning glories. Like I said, they are persistent. I've tried, but I can't get rid of them in this garden. The cabbages should be ready to harvest late June, in just a couple of weeks. Now let's get this netting closed before the white cabbage butterflies come back. And this is our fall cabbage going to seed. I protected it all winter. Soon they're going to be ready. Now I'm growing these cabbages for my husband Dale's salad, so I don't need that many, and I'll grow more in the fall. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today it's time for a mid-June garden tour. Now there's no color yet on these grapes, but they continue to grow bigger every day. Now, if you remember in the last video, squirrels dug up this miniature rose, but the hardware cloth we put down to protect it has done the job. Nobody has touched it. And look at these yellow squash. They have just exploded. They've been loving these 80-degree days, and I think possibly tomorrow we can get our first small harvest. Now the broccoli rabe we had planted on this side, it's done. It's just been too warm. So I pulled it up, but I left one plant to go to seed. And the blueberries are showing just a hint of color. I've kept watering them every day. It really helps them to develop sweet, plump berries. Now, all of the California giant zinnias have at least one flower, and the side branches now are setting blooms. And Dale has already been cutting some for us to enjoy. And the sunflowers are starting to open. And the one behind me is absolutely gorgeous. It's a mixture of colors. We'll walk over there later and look at it. But let's look at the ones close to us right now. And remember, I have onions under 2 tunnels, one right here and one in the back of the garden. Even though this one gets less sun, the bulbs are really getting big. Now is the prime time for bulb formation. but they do require water, 2 inches every 4 days. And I have been watering. Normally I neglect my onions, but I decided this year I'm going to grow big bulbs. Now this is what we call the flower ring, and there's not really much going on in here right now. There are a few lilies that are trying to open, but see the brown leaves back here? Any bulbing flower that you have, once the flower dies, you can cut off the flower stalk. But the green leaves you need to leave because those are going to be collecting energy from the sun and storing it in the bulb for next year's flowers. Wait until those leaves die off naturally. Then you can remove them. The catbird is not happy I'm near its jelly feeder. It's screaming at me. So these were from our snowflake flowers, and they finally died back on their own, so I'm going to cut or really pull them off. Now, most of my lilies I've gotten for free. I've rescued them either from the church, like after Easter, or down at the old historic cemetery after Mother's Day. And down here is our bronze fennel, and we're growing it for the swallowtail butterfly caterpillars. They'll lay their eggs on the fennel, and then the caterpillars will eat the plant. It's one of their host plants. And here is the sunflower that is absolutely gorgeous. Over the years, because these are my own saved seed, different varieties have mixed, and it's made a very variegated petal. But some are still true to their original color. But they're all going to be absolutely gorgeous, and we're going to have so many blossoms because they are multi-branching. Our June-bearing strawberries are basically finished. They fruited late April through May, and now every day I check for runners, and I've found that planting my strawberries along the edge of my sidewalk makes it an easier task to find those runners. Now this side doesn't need thinning because they were properly spaced when planted, but I do want the plants to grow bigger, so I'm cutting the runners because I don't want the plant to put its energy into propagating new plants. I want it to put its energy into growing new leaves. Did you know one mother plant can produce 120 baby plants every growing season? Seems being 6 feet away from the feeder, they'll accept, and they've come back to eat. I really do enjoy my birds. Now these are going to be my best onions because they get the most sun. I'm really happy with them. You know, normally, like I said, I just neglect my onions, but this year I decided I was going to do it right. So we have a red Italian flat onion, Walla Walla onions, and a yellow Spanish onion. There's a new bird over there. I think it's a baby robin. Sorry. Now, this sunflower is really taking off, and soon the branches are going to start to break because the squirrels will climb up and down it to get on the roof of the garage, and it also tends to block the door. So I've added this protected wire for it to go through. First time to do this, but I think it's going to work, and I might actually try it on a few more. Most years, this makes over 100 flowers, just this one plant, because this is the warmest location in the garden. And all along here are my prize okra. Here, nights are too cold and they make it hard for okra to grow. And I'm the only person around here that grows okra. You can't even find starter plants in the nurseries here. They don't sell them. And fresh and frozen okra in our area are horrible. They're very woody. So if I want okra, I have to grow it myself. So I started these in February in the basement, and they were 3 feet tall when I planted them out in mid-May. And it worked. This is my most successful okra year ever. I've already been harvesting 2 or 3 every day, and I'm just freezing them in a baggie. While I love my okra, my favorite vegetable to grow are my sweet peppers. And these are a sweet red Ivarsky pepper. It's a tapered, about 7-inch long pepper. And you can see they're starting to flower. They really suffer from the cold, but finally they've exploded with green growth, and they're much happier. Now, do you remember this one is double the size of the rest because it's right here by this warm compost pile. Now, behind the onions, we have our Black Beauty eggplant. And it has some flowers too. Let's peek and see if we can find one. Now, the netting is here to protect the onions from digging squirrels, skunks, and other animals. But one benefit has been it has protected the eggplant from the flea beetles. This is the best they've ever looked. They like that it's warmed up too. Well, there's not any flowers that are actually open. I see a couple, but they're still closed. And this sunflower, this is the one I think I'm going to put the wire around too, because the branches tend to break because it sticks out into the sidewalk. We'll give it a try. Now come back tomorrow. We're going to continue our tour out in the alleyway, checking out the grandkids' garden. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to take a tour of the grandkids' garden. Now, just 2 weeks ago on the tour, this had just been planted that Memorial Day weekend, and wow, has it exploded in growth. This has the same plants that are planted in ground in the garden, but the size is different because the growing conditions are different. For example, these mammoth sunflowers in the corner, they're the exact same ones from the front garden, and those are massive already because they were planted earlier and they're in a much warmer, sunnier location. And these were planted later and they get less sun and they have more limited soil. Location, soil, the amount of water and light, it all makes a difference how your plants grow. Now the grandkids' zinnias are still small, but they both have flowers and they're going to keep growing and branching out. And tomatoes are always fun to grow with kids. Now, these are actually doing better than the ones in the front garden because birds haven't touched these. Remember the ones in the front? Nesting birds in the area just kept plucking off the leaves over and over again. But the birds never touched these. And the one on this side actually has some blossoms. Now, normally when I plant my sweet peppers, I'll take off any small fruit that's there. But I thought it would be fun to leave them because the grandkids would enjoy it. And they both had a pepper on it when they planted them, but one fell off in the storm. But the other one is actually turning red. Now, normally these sweet peppers are 7 inches, and this one's small because it developed before the pepper plant was transplanted. Letting kids plant and grow vegetables is a great way to introduce them to new foods. Not once do they complain, I don't want to plant that because I don't like it. No, they were thrilled to plant them all, and the eggplant is a perfect example. I doubt either one of them have ever even tasted eggplant, but they loved planting those, and they both have blossoms. And kids always love growing flowers and herbs. The beautiful colors and the wonderful smells. It's always a hit with kids. So both of the grandkids are growing marigolds, and marigolds are easy to grow. They're a great flower for kids. And not only do the petunias have beautiful color, they also smell heavenly. Now I do deadhead these every day to keep them blooming. Basil's fun because you can use it to make their own pizzas, and it can be harvested often and keeps growing. Now last, I've planted strawberries all along the border because I've been thinning them out in the in-ground garden. And so far, they're still alive and growing. Now I do have to water this garden every day. Raised beds will require more water more often. Now come back tomorrow and we'll tour the other half of this back garden. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to continue our mid-June garden tour here along the right-hand side of the garden. Two days ago, we started along here, and I showed you what was going on in the left-hand side of the garden. Then yesterday, we visited the grandkids' garden out here in the alleyway. Now we're going to explore the other half of the garden back here. Now remember, from the first garden tour in early June, there's a sunflower growing behind this door, and it gets blocked whenever I'm outside working, but it's still growing. Let me show you. Now I like planting my strawberries along the edge because it makes it easier to harvest fruit and to check for runners to trim off. But this area was too thick. So recently I dug them all up, potted them up. In this small area, there were so many baby plants, and that's the reason our strawberries have become so small. So it's really hot right now from a heat wave, and it might not be the best time to pot up these strawberries, but we'll see how they do. I got 94 plants from just this 5 to 6 foot strip. That's way too many. Now, did you notice on the shelf that I was giving away free strawberries? Those were growing along here. And they were blocking the carrots and just really not getting enough sun to fruit. So 2 or 3 weeks ago, I potted them up and they've developed roots. so I'm ready to give them away to my neighbors. And I'm going to do the same with all of these. Share them with the community. The moringa is loving the heat. Up until last week, we were still having nights below 60, and that's why some of the leaves are yellow. But now with this heat wave, green growth has emerged, and these things are just going to get taller and taller really quickly, because in the next 2 weeks, we're going to be in the 90s, which isn't normal here for June. Now here are our purple cosmic carrots, and they're doing really well. I do keep these watered every day. I don't let them dry out. So we had 2 sowings, and the first sowing in this area hopefully will be ready this month. And the little second area, maybe a month and a half after that. And notice the flower in the middle from our fall carrot, making seeds. This netting dome protects them from digging animals. And by the way, I do need to weed in here. Last year's onion, it's done flowering. And now the seed pods have emerged. But they're not ready yet. They're still green. I am big on saving seeds. And here's our fall beets. And the seeds are so close to being ready. Both the onions and the beets have to go through 2 seasons. They have to go through the winter to make seeds. And all along here are our blackberries. Now they've got a little bit of pink and going to be ready in a few weeks. All of the beets we planted along here in March have been harvested. This gives us access for harvesting the blackberries. Now, do you see these tall blackberry canes? Those are for next year's berries. Letting them grow really tall and zip tying them to the trellis and then letting them flop over, and I'm going to root them in pots. And then snip them off to make new plants and share with my community. Because the tips, when they touch soil, will develop roots. And here's where I tied them to the trellis, and I'll cut that off. I need to get these zip tied up. And here are red acres cabbages. And the middle are forming heads. So let's get this open so we can see it better. We need to feel the heads. Are they firming up? They're still small, but they are tight. And look, blackberries look much better. I took care of those canes. The fall cabbage going to seed, they're almost ready. Just like the onions and the beets, they have to go through the cold winter, and I protected them below 25 degrees. Eventually, the raspberries are going to fill out this area. Probably next year or the year after, but for now, I'm growing lemon cucumbers and one sunflower. And I see we have our first fruit. Here we have 2 stevia plants. Look, the catbird's back. It loves that jelly feeder. Anyway, once these cabbage seeds are harvested, we'll take out this plant. And it'll give these stevia room to bush out. And when I'm finished filming, I'm going to do a harvest, and we're going to harvest some of this. That'll help it to bush out also. And here are our basil. I like to have these near the kitchen, the stevia too. They really would prefer more sun because this area gets shaded from the raspberry some, but they'll get big enough for me. And along this strip, I tend to grow lettuce. And we have some radishes. Again, easy access to the kitchen, and more shade helps the lettuce last longer. Now these 2 sunflowers in this area haven't opened yet, and they are smaller because they get less sun, but near the balcony where we can watch the birds, because the goldfinch will flock to these sunflowers. That's the biggest reason I grow them. Then all along here are our red raspberries, and right now they're in fruit, and they're going to fruit again in the fall. They're also sending up new young canes, and that's going to be where the fall fruit develops. So it's different from the blackberries. So the fruit right now was on the canes that were there in the fall last year. They fruited last fall and this spring, and the ones growing right now will fruit in the fall and then next spring. The canes the fruit is currently on, they're going to die back, and I'll cut them out. You have to know the habits of your plants. Yesterday I made a really big harvest of the raspberries, but by this afternoon, more are going to be ripe from the heat. And down here is my second mini rose. I rescued it from the cemetery. It was almost dead with no leaves, but look, it has some buds. The other one too. 2 days ago when I filmed, I didn't notice the bud, but now it's starting to open. Come back tomorrow where we're going to tour the side garden, what we call Bumblebee Breezeway. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Just finished part 3 of our garden tour, so let's go ahead and have our first biggish harvest. Every day I've been getting 2 or 3 okra pods, and today there's just one that's ready. Now this is the grandkids' garden, and the pepper's small because it was already there when we transplanted the pepper. But I left it on the plant because I thought that would be fun for the kids. Normally these peppers get about 7 inches long. The ones in the in-ground garden, they'll get longer. Let's go ahead and harvest some basil to help it bush out better. Now my husband Dale is out of salad, so now is a perfect time to harvest this head. It's warming up, and it's going to get too hot for this full-size lettuce. Now we've left the core because hopefully it'll grow again. Let's look at the one we harvested last week. All of these radishes need to come out. It's time to sow some more. This will be the second time I've harvested basil. It really helps it bush. And the first time I've harvested the stevia. Like the basil, I want it to bush out and not get all tall and leggy. Now, the raspberries need a little bit more time to ripen in the heat of the day, and I'll be able to harvest more this afternoon. Very nice harvest that makes me excited. This is the first squash I've harvested. There's going to be more probably every day because it grows so fast. Thank you. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to continue our mid-June garden tour here along the side of the house between the row houses in what we call Bumblebee Breezeway. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to tour the front garden. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today it's time to harvest our red acres cabbages and last fall's red cabbage seeds. How do I know if the cabbages are ready to be harvested? Well, 3 reasons. Look at the number of days to maturity for the specific variety. Check the center head to see if it's firm, and has the weather changed from cool to hot. Now this variety is mature in 70 to 100 days, and today is its 98th day of growing, so it's time. Now here in north central Maryland, the temperatures have definitely changed. The heat wave, it arrived last week. This netting, it's done a great job protecting the cabbages from the insects. These leaves look so beautiful and healthy. The leaves look so good. I think I'm going to keep them and dehydrate them, grind them, and add them to our green powder. They really look good. Now, Red Acres cabbages are on the small side, 2 to 4 pounds. So let's see what these weigh. Now, how am I going to store these? So you want to leave the outer leaves. Don't take those off. Don't wash them. This isn't required, but I'm going to wrap them in a paper towel. And store them in a baggie. And they'll keep in the refrigerator for months, up to 7 months. Now, in the fall, I left 1 red cabbage, and when it got below 25 degrees this winter, I protected it. And in the spring, it split and sent up multiple flower stalks. And now we have seeds. And I know they're ready to harvest because they're turning brown and they're splitting open. But more importantly, the finch have flocked to it and are gobbling them up. So I filmed a couple of days ago and went ahead and harvested some because I wanted to make sure I got my own share. But there's plenty for the birds. Now let's go ahead and harvest some more. There are so many seeds in each pod that I've got enough. Now we're going to bring these in the house to dry. We're going to leave that plant, and after the birds strip it of the seeds, We'll pull it out. And I also need to go collect those leaves too. Thank you for visiting Withrow Urban Homestead. See you later. Bye-bye.